So 5 edge rushers the Browns should be tracking as they approach the draft. This from Dawg Pound Daily. Number 5, Karl Brooks from Bowling Green. Number 4, Mike Morris from Michigan. Number 3, Nick Hampton, Appalachian State. Number 2, a guy we've talked about with you a number of times, Nick Herbig from Wisconsin. And number 1, Isaiah McGuire. So let's go through a couple of those. When you look at those, Tim, who are guys that you think make a lot of sense there for the Browns?
I think those top 2 make the most sense. I would probably flip Herbig and McGuire a little bit just because I feel like, Herbig, I think, is a guy who's immediately ready to, have a much bigger impact in the pass rush game. I talked last time I was on about how, the 240 pounds doesn't scare me at all, really, because, in fact, the Browns would go to the Y9, size is not going to necessarily be as much of a prerequisite, I guess you could say, for that position. You'd be looking more at guys who can bend the edge, kind of win with speed, and I think that's where Nick Herbig's game is. And you look at the massive production he has, I think that's a huge positive in his in his resume out there. Is he's produced so well. I feel like when it comes to pass rushers, you can't just have traits. You also have had to produce at some point to show that you have an ability to prove you've had an ability to get to the quarterback and finish those sacks, in addition to the traits that you're looking for, at that position. So that's something I really like when it comes to Nick Herbig, is he has that production, and he's also been able to just perform very well in those pass rush situations. And the other guy, Isaiah McGuire, we did a mock. I was on the Orange Brown Talk podcast with Dan Lobby and Lance Risland Friday. This was a guy we had, as an option late in the 3rd round for the Browns. And this is another guy, solid production. Looking at his numbers right now, 13 and a half sacks in his last 2 seasons, 27 tackles for loss in that same time frame. Very quick first step, a 10-yard split of 1.59 seconds. So you're talking a guy who can get off the line of scrimmage very quickly, which is another thing you want out of that Y9, is if you may not necessarily need bend, but if you got speed to kind of, create pressure where the offensive tackle thinking he's got to go really far out to try and get, to chip the defensive end and make sure he doesn't get to the quarterback. That's almost as good. Now, McGuire's got some refinement to do as far as, how to really maximize what he has, but there's a lot of good tools there. And, when you're productive in the SEC, obviously going up against those great offensive linemen in the SEC, I mean, some of the best linemen do come from that conference, as much as people, here in Ohio maybe don't necessarily want to hear that. That's just the reality. Is that just where some of the best physical football is played? And if you produce there, it shows you're a player who's capable of making some big things happen. So McGuire is a guy I would look for if the Browns don't go for Nick Herbig.